Marvel Snap, it seems, has hit a bit of a lull metagame-wise, with many of the top decks being just what they were for a few months. So let's take a look at what it would take to change that. I'm KMBest, and this is a FAUXTA. For this video, I'll be using data from untap.gg. It's not perfect, but it's the closest thing we can get to recognizing what cards in the metagame are problems. I don't want to just fully vibe it out here, although my vibes are obviously important. This is my channel. I want to actually try to introduce a methodology here. In so doing, I'll be looking at two different cohorts of data. The top 50% of Infinite, which I would describe as relatively good players, and the ranks 50 to 99, which I would describe as probably where I expect the majority of people who play Marvel Snap to fall within. This means that we'll be looking at two different cohorts of data, and in order for a card to actually make it into that, it either needs to have an extremely low play rate or win rate at one of those two cohorts. So as we can see, the top 4 decks on my tier list for basically the past month, Supergiant, Dr. Doom 2099, Star-Lord, Master of the Sun, and Sholau the Undying, are all at about 7 to 10% of the post 50% Infinite metagame here. All of them are very positive, all of them are a reasonable portion of the meta, and fairly powerful. In another card game, this might actually be the kind of thing that they're very happy to keep this way, but Marvel Snap is a game that thrives on originality, and having the same decks sit at the top for an extended period of time just doesn't bode well for either their business model of releasing new cards or the people who play this game's enjoyment of the game. This is a faster game for a faster digital age, and it probably should move faster than other card games. So even where another card game dev might look at this and say, that seems totally fine to me, I'm not sure Marvel Snap has the luxury or desire to do this. We see that these decks maintain roughly the same win rate and popularity at the 50 to 99 cohort, and that seems like enough for me to say that it is pretty clear that these are probably the decks, the cards in the decks that I would like to target. So we know where to aim the nerfs, but what about the buffs? These are the 7 horsemen that have released in Marvel Snap so far. A few of them are actively good. These are stats from top 50%. Caliban, Horseman of Pestilence, that's a card that goes in Doom 2099. Gambit, Horseman of Death, good enough that it had to get nerfed. Polaris, Horseman of Pestilence is like pretty okay. A few of them are actively bad. There are 2 that really stick out. The first is Archangel, Horseman of Death. Now, keep in mind for these stats that the time period being used is after the patch. So the older ones that haven't been changed, there's much less interest around them. And to me, there are 2 numbers on here that are extremely worrying if you are them. It is 0.9% play rate on Selene, 0.7% play rate on Juggernaut. My instinct is that both of those are particularly meaningful. How can we fix those? I think is a very good question. So what we're going to do for buffs is we're going to look at Archangel, we're going to look at Selene, and we're going to look at Juggernaut. And for nerfs, I mean, you already know. So let's start with the obvious. I think Sholau is probably worth nerfing. This card has sat on top of mid-range decks by making them into combo decks with things like Maverick for an extended period of time. I think there's a couple directions you can go with this. I have gone very drastic here, 5/6+2. That is extreme. I don't think they need to go this far. I think they could go 5/4+3. I think they could go like 5/8, 5/9, 5/7+2, but I have opted for the version that is the most prejudiced against Sholau. And the reason I, in hypothetical game designer world, am considering this is largely because of the argument that Marvel Snap is a game that should be changing fast, and that a fail state for a nerf actually is that it leaves the deck around in a similar position to what it has been before. This is a notable departure from my previous methodology, where my goal was to keep the cards alive and make sure that they still remained playable. I don't depart from this methodology lightly. My instinct is that this is a bit of a special situation where a bunch of factors are coming together and influencing me wanting to behave like this. From Sholau being as unpopular as it is in terms of accrued community sentiment, to the fact that it genuinely has earned some of that. I think accrued community sentiment is a difficult thing to balance around, and it's something I would not want them to do. Now, why am I doing it? Because unfortunately, it is something that matters. Now, if they wanted to be less stringent on Sholau, I think that's fine. If they wanted to cut some points off him and keep him at 3, I think that would result in a balanced card. What I'm worried about specifically is that Sholau and Star-Lord, to another, probably a greater extent, have caught what I like to call Arishem's disease, where people still think of them, just like if you nerf them into being bad, people are going to have such a negative feeling associated with them that they're going to hate them if they're at all playable. And accounting for this is what I'm trying to do, but it might just be a fool's errand. Therefore, I am dropping the hammer on Sholau. I spent a while trying to figure out how to make fair Fin Fang Foom functional while making unfair Fin Fang Foom non-functional. Star-Lord, Fin Fang Foom, and to a lesser extent Alioth are in a bit of a symbiotic relationship. Fin Fang Foom in a ramp deck is simply just not problematic. Fin Fang Foom, when you're allowed to play other cards, that's one thing. And so what I've done with this is take a bunch of power off of Fin Fang Foom's on reveal, unless, and realistically this is what I'm trying to say, he was the only card you played this turn. Hopefully, this keeps Fin Fang Foom as a satisfying card in order to fulfill his role when you are actually playing him, but not so much when you are playing him and a bunch of other stuff. The pretty specific scenario in which Fin Fang Foom ends up being very problematic is when you're playing him and a Juggernaut, when you're playing him and an Absorbing Man, when you're playing him and an Alioth. Those are the things that people hate about Star-Lord, and I do think it would probably be a mistake to brutally murder Star-Lord for the sins of a cohort of other cards who are only really popular when you're able to cheat massive amounts of energy. So my instinct is, let's tie Fin Fang Foom to his sole identity as a very big guy and make it way less profitable to play him with these other cards and way less profitable to activate his ability a million different times. That's the basic idea that I'm going for with this card. It might actually be a little bit of an over nerf. I'd be very open to returning points to his base stats if this is a huge downgrade, but I think we've hit the point where it's pretty clear that the problem isn't just specifically Star-Lord. Star-Lord's been nerfed pretty heavily, and as long as you're able to do or access this Fin Fang Foom Alioth Juggernaut endgame, he's gonna be worth doing. So either you make him impossible to function, which I like a little less, or you address these cards. Fin Fang Foom, Alioth, and Juggernaut, which I think are largely likely to see play almost exclusively in the form of cheating energy and getting a bunch of rewards for it. So, with that in mind, I'm also doing this, Alioth to 6/6. Alioth has basically never been the good guy in a metagame. Even Cosmo, a card who is famously mostly protecting combos from interaction, had his moment in the sun of being a good guy, a good dog even, as the Star-Lord metagame started ramping up and he became one of the most popular functional counters to those decks. Alioth has never done this. Alioth has only ever existed in the context of, I've locked something down and now your cards don't happen. I think that it is materially worse to have your cards invalidated by an Alioth or a Fin Fang Foom than it is to simply have your opponent invalidate your cards by having more points than you. One of those feels like engaging in the game Marvel Snap, one of those simply does not. Alioth, to me, is a card that has never added anything positive to the game. They had it at 6/6 during the Techpocalypse, and to me, it was fairly baffling that they chose to make it stronger again. I'm just putting it back back to its Techpocalypse stats, and frankly, if you go back and watch my old videos, I thought they should have left it there anyway. This card has never done anything positive. It is only ever fully asymmetrically fun for the person that plays it and not fun for the other person, and at some point, they will almost certainly make other cards that are able to do Star-Lord type things that cheat a bunch of energy or lock down lanes, and Alioth will become problematic again, and I am just sick of him. As for Star-Lord himself, I'm chopping a couple power off. I think the other direction they could go is leave him where he is and have him gain power. I was of two minds about this. When I originally approached figuring out a way to nerf the deck, I wanted to leave Star-Lord alone. And that's going to sound weird, but the reason I wanted to leave Star-Lord alone is like all my ideas for getting rid of him made the Shang-Chi counterplay of him not work. And I know that's like a horrendous way to go about game balance, is like, well, if we let him get to 10 power, I know he'll be worse if he has less power. That's why I ended up doing this, but that was a line of thought I was entertaining, where it was like, okay, if I take the points of power off, if I say Star-Lord can't grow anymore and leave him at 5'8", then maybe they're still going to be able to do all this. My instinct is that I have done some pretty significant damage to this deck with those three changes. Fin Fang Foom no longer soloing lanes is probably the most damaging thing you can do. And of course, you have the damage that I've done to Star-Lord, which has taken effectively, 4 points off of your ability to use this card in terms of Arnim Zola. Arnim Zola is a particularly important card to this deck because it is what enables you to get priority in a world where you are playing Alioth. And frankly, I could do an entire FAUXTA about the deck that is Star-Lord. When I look at that deck, I see 11 design mistakes, and then, my god, Jim Hammond, the only ethical card in the entire deck. But genuinely, from top to bottom, it's just a bunch of stuff where I'm like, I could take a point off of that. Wave and Luna Snow could easily be 3/5s. I have no idea why Grandmaster and Absorbing Man are as aggressively costed as they are. Those are cards that went from 2-0 and 4-3 to 2-3 and 4-5. No reason for that in the modern era of Marvel Snap. None whatsoever. There's a litany of ridiculous cards in that deck, and only addressing a couple of them. I didn't even talk about Juggernaut. Like, that's where we're at here. And so you have a deck that is composed of a lot of different pieces. I'm wary of obliterating just the one piece that makes it a deck, because I do think that it would be missing the trees for the forest, I guess. It's the opposite of missing the forest for the trees, I think. Like, there's a lot going on in that deck that makes it what it is. And while this is the most important part, I do think addressing how awful the turn 6 play pattern is with Foom and with Alioth means that it is very possible that this is an over nerf to this specific card. It might, like, I would be a little bit wary of rolling all of these out on the same OTA if, for example, the community didn't despise this guy. And I do think that was sort of the tiebreaker here. The overwhelming sentiment I hear is people really hate this guy. And frankly, I'm more sympathetic to him, and I direct a lot more of my anger at the trifecta of Foom, Juggernaut, and Alioth. But because I think that, like, a lot of what people are hating is that is happening to them, and Star-Lord is sort of the thing enabling that to happen. But if you were enabling, like, I don't know, you playing a Galactus First Steps, nobody would really care about the guy. And so I do wonder if maybe I've overdone it here. I'm interested to see what y'all think. Supergiant's already great. I think we've been pretty harsh on Star-Lord and Sholau. I don't really see a reason why she can't go back to 4 or 5. I think this one's a pretty free inclusion here. We looked at the main 4 decks. Supergiant, Doom 2099 are up there with Star-Lord and Sholau. I think it would be a mistake to be this harsh on Star-Lord and Sholau and not at least take a little bit of a knock at these guys. Same exact thought process here, just this deck is already very good. They typically are pretty harsh on decks that are fairly easy to play. This is one of the easiest to play decks in the entire game. They could have done a lot of things. Like, if you want to hit Doom 2099 as an archetype, there's a lot you can hit. The other card for Supergiant that I would look at hitting is maybe a Negasonic or something like that. But if we're going to look at hitting Doom 2099, I think hitting Doom 2099 is totally reasonable. Hitting Aurora is totally reasonable. A lot of different things that you can do in this space. I opted for the most ham-handed one and just said, what if Doom 2099 was just like a little bit weaker? It's buffs time. So What I've done with Selene Horseman of Famine is make her a 4/7. I was fairly tempted to put the bonus points that I wanted to get on this card into her ability. But the more I think about and contemplate and even play with Selene, what I come away with is I think that a lot of what makes her feel bad is that if you don't get her, she is so incredibly non-functional. Like, she's a card that I think of as very similar to something like Phantom X. Phantom X is asking more, but he also has more synergies. Like, Phantom X works with Jocasta, for example. Phantom X gets to be in the sort of archetype that has Airwalker. Phantom X gets to have Marrow. He has a lot more help in being what he wants to be, where Selene very much does not have any of that help. You aren't doubling her in any meaningful way. You are literally just playing her and hoping that she is a good stat stick. And I think that my instinct here was that I wanted to make the fail case of this card stronger so that it was more explorable. If you make the success case of this card stronger, it becomes more tied specifically to decks that are always hitting the success case, and that might not be the best thing for this card if what we want is people to explore the space that it's in. So my instinct is I'm going to reduce some of the cost of splashing this. I'm going to reduce the cost of, like, okay, you know, I'm playing a rocks deck, but I only got my debris and I didn't get my incredibly amazing Rhino or whatever, but it's okay, she's still a 4/7. That's sort of what I'm going for here. I'm trying to make her more splashable as opposed to make dedicated Selene decks notably stronger. And I think that that's important because she seems like she's made for the rock deck, which is very much a deck that, like, wants to splash her as opposed to, like, a deck that's gonna, like, play an Ultron. You know what I mean? So that's why I went this direction, buffing her base stats and her fail case instead of buffing her success case. With Archangel, I went the other way. I think this is probably a very powerful card if it simply gets Strongest added to it, and it will revive the strongest card that has died now. That's it. It's just going to get the strongest card. It's going to be good. This is a powerful card now. I strongly believe that. If you are doing kind of anything, getting targeting on this stuff is so important. Previous Angel was comparable to Elixir. I think at this, it would very clearly be better than Elixir. Maybe there would be other utility options available to it as well. What can we do with a card like this? I'd like to see. It's very possible that this is an overbuff. It's also possible that Selene is an overbuff. I'm being really drastic on these because they were and are still obtainable in the seasonal Series 5 pack. That means that I think they have a little more room to take swings on these. Juggernaut Horseman of War is a weird case. His biggest issue is that it's just not very easy to utilize a stat stick in the world that we currently live in. The decks that want stat sticks at 2 are Supergiant decks and Doom 2099 decks. Doom 2099 doesn't actually have a lot of cards that are going to have different power and plays Aurora, which doesn't work with Objective. Supergiant doesn't care if you have your points late, and the face down cards from Supergiant reveal after the Juggernaut actually checks. So what I've done here is less a buff and more a reworking of what kind of card this is. This is now a 2/4 that needs to see 6 and gains 4. In other words, you can play it as a priority card. That is a huge upgrade to what this card previously was. This is now an on-rate card that you can play for priority in a deck and not feel bad when you don't hit it. Again, I think this is a weird direction for someone like me to go. I talk a lot about how it's usually better to buff the rewards than buff the base stats here. But Juggernaut is such a weird case that I think buffing the base stats is actually more valuable to him than putting more power on the rewards. I would rather play 2/4 +4 Juggernaut than I would like 2/2 +8 or +7 Juggernaut, because I am going to be able to actually convert that body into a priority advantage. And in the metagame we're currently in, you don't get to play stat sticks unless you're converting them into material advantages. And I think a 2/4 that becomes a 2/8 is a totally fine thing to have in your deck. I am being aggressive here, but remember, my goal with these horsemen is I want to make them meta relevant. I want them to be serious and powerful threats. I don't want them to be like Star-Lord or anything, but I want them to be cards that people will play. And I think in this world, this is a better path towards that. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest, you've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.